Hello and welcome to this tutorial to give you guidance on managing your Workbooks users. There are various things to consider when managing your users, and exactly what's required will depend on the way that your system's been set up and what you want to achieve. Most of our customers go through an implementation process with our professional services team, so the framework will already be in place. But we want you to be able to manage your environment yourself. So in this tutorial, we'll cover the 3 high-level things that need to be in place before any user can do anything. And that's modules, licenses and extensions. And that will reflect whatever it is that you've purchased from us. The access that users have to different parts of the system are controlled by capabilities. And capabilities are put into groups. So we'll look at how a user inherits capabilities from the groups they belong to. Your database contains your intellectual property, so it's important to have the right levels of security and authentication in place to protect your data, but without prohibiting users from working. Once we've looked at the above settings, we'll work through how to create a new user, and then how to update a user's record if there's been a name change or a change to their email address. And finally, I'll run through our recommendations for actions to take when a user leaves. Before we get going, I wanted to clarify what we're not covering in this session. If you're using Microsoft's Azure Active Directory, you can provide your users with the ability to sign into Workbooks without needing to enter a separate username and password, making it easier for the users and more secure for your business. In addition, you can also create new user templates so that any new Active Directory users can be given a Workbooks account automatically without the need for a system administrator to do any initial configuration. However, this video is aimed at customers who aren't using Active Directory and who set up their users directly within Workbooks. There's more information about Azure AD on our knowledge base at workbooks.com/help/Azure_AD_configuration, or simply visit our knowledge base and search for Azure. You can also set up Google Authentication. This provides a higher level of login protection because it requires 2-factor authentication. Again, we're not covering it in this tutorial, but information on how it works and how to set it up is available on our knowledge base. In addition, if your licenses include advanced security, you can configure your system so that, for example, users in the French sales team can't see opportunities owned by the UK sales team and vice versa. For the purposes of this video, we're assuming that you aren't implementing advanced security. But if you are and you need any help with it, please contact your account manager or email support@Workbooks. We'll start by looking at modules, licenses and extensions. The licenses you've bought will cover a range of functionality which is provided via different modules. It's likely that you'll want to use all of the functionality that you've bought, so you should ensure that all the checkboxes are ticked. But if something's included that you know isn't required by any of your users, you can switch modules off. And I'll show you where to do that when we move into Workbooks. Bear in mind though that module settings apply at an account level, so if you've got more than one database on your account, switching modules on or off in one database will affect all the others too. Licenses are granted to individual users and consist of 2 things. The allocated edition, which is the main license, such as CRM, Business Professional on this screen, and then any allocated extensions that add extra functionality such as multi-language or access to our Exchange server synchronization. When we move into Workbooks, I'll show you where you can see how many licenses you've bought of each type, along with information about how many of them are already allocated. We'll turn now to look at capabilities and groups. We control the features of the product and the ability to navigate to records using capabilities. There are several for every different record type. For example, there are currently 15 capabilities relating to opportunities, and there's just a subsection of them showing on the screen at the moment, showing the most commonly used ones, such as being able to view records of a particular type, to be able to create new ones, and to modify existing ones. There are hundreds of capabilities, and this means that you can be quite granular about what a user can or can't do. To make the management of this easier, capabilities are put into user groups and then you associate the user with one or more user group. As I said, users can be in more than one user group and they're given the capabilities from all the groups they belong to. In the screenshot here, you can see a user record for Anthony Khan showing that he's got 329 capabilities. You can see that he's got the address lookup capability from the Everyone group, and it's in the limited access admin group too. The same applies to allow global search, but he's inherited the allow editing of people in grid capability purely because he's in the limited access admin group. We provide you with a number of groups that are already configured with capabilities, such as salesperson, marketing manager, and system administrator, and most customers find these meet their needs. However, you can modify the capabilities in these groups to increase or decrease what a user can do, and you can also create as many new groups as you choose. Each group is typically made up of many capabilities, but you can have groups that just have one or two capabilities if you want quite granular control over what users can do. Remember, it's capabilities that control where in the system a user can navigate to and some of the actions they can take, such as modifying and deleting records. I said I wasn't going to cover advanced security in this session, but just be aware that if you do have the advanced security license, you can control the permissions that specific records or groups of records have. So you could have a situation where someone can view a record but not delete it, even though they have the delete capability. If you'd like more information about advanced security and using permissions to control access to your data, as I mentioned earlier, please contact your account manager or our support team. Each user can belong to multiple groups, and they inherit the capabilities across all of those groups. Finally, be aware that all new users are automatically added to a group called Everyone without you having to set this up. The Everyone group contains the basic capabilities that a typical user would need in order to get up and running with the system, such as being able to view, create and modify people and organisation records. Just like the other groups, you can modify these capabilities, so we'd advise that you double-check them before users get going with workbooks. Let's spend a moment looking at security and authentication within the system. If you have system administrator capabilities, you can control the password policy for everyone, such as how complex passwords are and how frequently they expire. If you've got the advanced security license, you can allow users to authenticate using either Google or Microsoft, but as I mentioned, we're not covering that. You can also set up additional security by ensuring that if a user is logging in from an IP address that they haven't used recently or from a new device, they receive a verification email that they have to acknowledge before continuing. The above are all set at an account level, but you can also specify controls on each user record so that different settings apply to different users. For example, if you're using Microsoft Authentication, you might have an external contractor who isn't part of your network, so you want to set up their record differently and allow them to log in via a password. Let's look at a couple more slides about setting up users before moving into workbooks to look at the areas we've spoken about. Setting up your users is straightforward as long as you understand the implications of what you're doing. We recommend that you set up your users before importing or creating data, because the user has to exist and have a valid license in order to assign records to them. When you set up a user, they're automatically given access to the database in which you set them up. But if you have more than one database, for testing or training purposes perhaps, you can add them to different ones, and you can also put them in different groups in each database if you want them to have different capabilities. If you're still setting up your system and you're not yet ready for users to get going, we'd recommend that you don't tick the Login Enabled checkbox shown on the right. Once you do, the user will be sent an activation email that they need to click on to activate. Separately, you'll need to let them know what their password is, so remember to do this securely. If a user changes their name for any reason and wants to be known by their new name within Workbooks rather than keeping their old one, all you need to do is open their user record and overtype the value in their full name field. This will automatically update the value that's shown anywhere on the system that previously showed their old name. There are a few exceptions to this, such as email signatures, which will have to be manually changed, and if you've created any custom fields that use values in people records rather than user records, the people records will also have to be updated. Also, if you've created any reports with formulae where you've manually typed in the user's name, those will need to be updated manually. If the user's email address has changed as well as their name, which it probably has, update that and save the user record. This will trigger an email to be sent to the new email address, asking the user to click to confirm that their login email address has changed. They won't be able to log in using their new email address until they've clicked this link, so remind them to look out for the email. The last thing I want to talk about before going into the product is about what you should do when a user leaves, because of course you don't want them to be able to log in and access your data anymore. However, what about all the records that are currently assigned to them? Most customers choose to leave the user's name against records such as completed opportunities and activities, but use bulk reassign to move things like organisations and people and any open records to someone new. In the previous slide, we talked about how to change a user's name by overtyping the full name. We don't, however, recommend this as an approach when someone's left. We don't advocate overtyping their name with that of a new user, because this will end up showing the new user's name in place of the previous one throughout the system. So it could look, for example, as though the new user was closing sales before they even started to work for you. Instead, our recommendation is that when a user leaves, you disable their login by taking the tick out of the checkbox next to login enabled. Then what you should do is change their allocated edition, use the pick list to select no edition login denied. And you should also remove the checks from all the allocated extensions as well. This will return the license and the extensions to your pot, so to speak, so that you can reallocate them to a new user. All records that have the old user's name in the assigned to field will stay like that unless you take action to change the value using either bulk updates as previously mentioned or changing them individually, manually. However, if you've taken the steps shown here, their name won't appear in the assigned to pick list on any records to assign new things to. That's enough of slideware, so I'm going to go into Workbooks now and try out the things we've discussed. Here I am in Workbooks, and I'm going to start by showing you whereabouts you go to see information on licenses and modules. Hopefully you're familiar with the Workbooks desktop, and to get to the account settings area, click on the Start button, choose Configuration, and then from the left-hand menu, choose Account Settings. And within here, the second option down, you can see is Licenses and Modules. The first tab, entitled Licenses, is just a list of information. It shows you what you've bought from us, how many licenses you've got of each type, when they're valid from, and when they expire. The second tab, License Usage, is also just for information. Again, it shows you the licenses that you've got, shows you how many are currently allocated, and therefore how many you've got left in that pot I talked about to allocate to other users. If you need to know who's got these licenses, you can click on the plus symbol on the left-hand side and you can see who's been allocated these licenses already. The Modules tab lists all the modules you've got access to. As I mentioned earlier, you should make sure that all of these are ticked unless you're absolutely sure that no one needs that functionality in any of your databases. Now let's look at user groups and capabilities, which you'll find within the Users and Security section of this configuration menu. I'll go to User Groups first, and you'll see the user groups that are available in this database on the right-hand side. Your list might vary a little bit from this, but there will certainly be similarities. You can open any of these groups by clicking on them. I'll open the salesperson group. Each group has 3 tabs. We're on the main one, so that gives us information about the name of the group and a description. If you're using multi-language, then you'll see translations. If I expand this reveal, if you want to restrict everyone in the group so that they can only log in from a specific IP address, you can put the permitted IP addresses into this field. Conversely, you can have a group that's exempted from any IP restrictions by ticking the box below. The reveal here next to Exchange synchronization is only applicable if you're syncing with Microsoft Exchange, and we're not covering that in this tutorial. The second tab, the Users tab, shows you all those users who've been added to this group so far. You can see at the top that there is an Add Users button, so you can add others straight from here if you choose to, just by ticking the box. Or you can add users to groups from their user record, which I'll do in a few minutes. The third tab shows all of the capabilities that this group has, and you can see that there are lots, and if I scroll through, there are lots of salesy things to do with sales leads and opportunities and that kind of thing, which is exactly what you'd expect because it is a salesperson group. If you want to add new capabilities to the group, there's a blue button at the top where you can do that. And again, you can just tick the ones that you want to see. If you know that you want to find any capabilities that have got a certain word in them, you can type that in and search for it, and then you can tick the boxes here if you choose to. Remember though, if you do add new capabilities, this will give all users in this group those capabilities. If you only wanted to give them to 1 or 2 users, it would be better to create a new group with those capabilities and add the specific users to those groups. So let's look at how to create a new group. So we're still within the Users and Security section with user groups highlighted, and we can click on New Group. And then you would fill in the name because it's mandatory, and the description as well. And then you can go to the capabilities and start adding some capabilities. I'm just randomly going to click on the top two just to illustrate the point and add those. And as I mentioned earlier, if I want to add any users to this, I can click on Add Users and go and choose whichever user I want to add. I'm not going to bother with any login restrictions. Save and close. And now I've got a new group called Test Group. You, of course, would give it a much better name than that. In the slides, I talked about security and authentication at an account level, so let's look at that before creating a new user. You can find that within the Account Settings menu on the Configuration option. So here we are, Authentication. First of all, Password Policy. You can see on the right-hand side that there's a tick in the Enable checkbox. If you're not authenticating using Microsoft or Google, you'll need to make sure that you've got a good password policy, and you need to make sure that this checkbox at the top is ticked, otherwise users won't be able to use a password to log in with. The complexity of this password isn't very good. It says a minimum length of 2 characters. For security reasons, you get to choose, but I would recommend that you're looking at probably 8 characters, something like that. And you can decide whether the password needs to have upper and lowercase letters in it, whether it needs to have numbers in it, and whether it needs to have punctuation in it. A bit further down, you get to choose the frequency with which that password expires, and you can set that in days, weeks, or months. Again, think about your organisation's security policies. There's a checkbox here that says, are you going to let passwords be reused? We don't recommend that you do, but you do have the option to set that if you like. Further down here, we've added an extra layer of security that disallows passwords that are known to have been used in security breaches on other services. You can turn this off if you choose. We would recommend that you don't allow breached passwords for security reasons. And right at the bottom, a little bit difficult to see, tucked away at the bottom, is the forgotten password functionality. I'm sure you'll have used that with other services in the past, and the same is available in Workbooks. However, we should mention that this mechanism, not just in Workbooks but anywhere, can open you up to security breaches, so you have the option to disable it here if you choose to. If you do that though, be aware that users will come to you for help with their passwords, and you should have a secure way of communicating passwords to them. So once you're happy with the settings here, click Save and Close. I'm just going to close it on the top right because I haven't changed anything. You can see we've got the Google and Microsoft authentication here. They're not enabled on this database, and we're not covering that today. But additional login security you can see is enabled, so we'll have a look at that. It's a simple checkbox, but this is where you control whether or not a link is emailed to users when they try to log in from an IP address that they haven't used recently, or similarly, if they try to log in from a device that hasn't been previously used. We do recommend that you check this box, but again, the choice is up to you. So now that we've looked at the security at the account level, let's look at creating a new user. So again, from the left-hand menu, I'm going to go to the Users option, and no surprises to see, click New User. And as I mentioned in the slides, it's really just a case of working through these fields. So you need to enter somebody's name. This is the name that's going to appear in the Assigned To field, the pick list in Workbooks. If you've got more than one employee with the same name, you should enter them differently so that it's easy to differentiate between the two of them when using the Assigned To field, or if you're building reports and want to differentiate between them. You can upload a photo here. The user can also upload a photo within their preferences, so they can update this without any action on your part. The Login Enabled checkbox is ticked by default. Remember, this means that when you click Save and Close for this user, an activation email will be sent to them, so you might want to remove it if you're not yet ready for them to start using Workbooks. Complete their login email address. This must be an email address that hasn't been used to set up a Workbooks user before. Scrolling down to the Security and Authentication area, all of these options default to whatever the account level settings are, the ones we just looked at, and it tells you what they are. So it says, for instance, login protection, the account default is on. But I've got the option to override these for an individual user if I choose to. I could set this to off. I'm not going to. But the same applies for password authentication and Google and Microsoft authentication if you were using those. Next, you've got the password fields. Remember to ensure that whatever you set up complies with the settings you specified within the account level password policy. If you leave the tick in the box next to Change Password Next Login, the user will have to enter the password you've set up when they first log in, and then they'll immediately see a message saying that their password has expired and they need to enter a new one of their own. That's fine, just maybe warn them that that's what they're going to need to do. You can also see that you can exempt someone from password expiry here. And again, with the forgotten password, it adopts the account level settings, which is a default of on, but you can change that if you choose to, just for this user. Then we've got the language and region settings, and you can set these, but users can change these within their own preferences if they choose to. And then further down, this is where some important information is going on. This is where you choose which allocated edition someone's got. You may have different options here depending on what you've bought, but you need to make sure that you allocate the right license. And then below that, the allocated extensions, make sure that the right ones are checked. Remember that you'll also want to add the user to one or more user groups so that they're given the right set of capabilities. Notice how on the Groups tab, there's already a 1 in brackets there, because this user has already been added to the Everyone group. You can't remove them from that, but you can add them to extra groups. So they're in one group and they've got 76 capabilities in this database. There may be a different number of capabilities in your Everyone group, but this is what John Smith, my new user, has already got without me adding him to new groups. But if I go to the Groups tab, let's add him to one or more groups. Maybe he's in sales, so I'll give him the sales manager and the salesperson groups. These numbers next to the tabs, don't worry, they haven't refreshed yet, but they will when we save this record. But if you look at the capabilities down in the bottom right hand corner, it does say that John has now got 146 capabilities. Some of them, like allow to post documents, he's inherited from the membership of both the sales manager and the salesperson group. But then there's a few where he's only got those by virtue of being in the Everyone group. If I were to scroll through a little bit, this one, export people and organisations, for instance, he's got that because he's in the sales manager group. So you can see how capabilities act cumulatively. So once you've got the person in the right groups, you can go and add them to other groups later or take them from groups if you choose, then go and click Save and Close. For those of you whose database has been set up to have more than one own organisation, there is an extra section at the bottom of a user record. Lots of you won't see this, but if you've got more than one own organisation, you will. It's mandatory to fill in what this user's default own organisation is. And you'll see that you can't select it here. There isn't anything in the pick list. It's just a slight nuance to the system, so I wanted to mention it to you. If instead you go to the Own Organisations tab and click Add Own Organisation, you'll see a list of however many own organisations you've got, and you can choose one or more of them, depending on what you want the user to be a member of. I'm just choosing one. That means that when I go back to the main tab now, you can see that it's saying my UK demo organisation in this instance is the default organisation for this particular user. So unless you do that, you won't be able to save the record. To iterate, that only applies to our customers who've got more than one own organisation on their database. Those of you that haven't won't even see that tab or that section. So now I can click Save and Close, and this will send an activation email to the login email address that I've entered for that user. And until they've actually clicked on that and activated their account, you'll see, if I make this a bit wider, you'll see that it says pending confirmation next to it, because they haven't actually confirmed that. Now what I did was I went and clicked on the activation link in that email, and now John Smith's user record, you can see it no longer says pending confirmation, and John can log in. Remember though that John can't magically know the password that you've set up for him, so you will have to communicate that to him in a secure way. We talked in the slides about what to do if somebody changes their name, in which case you'd open the relevant user record and you could simply change their full name here. You'd probably have to change their login email as well, I'm imagining, in which case they will get another email to confirm that change of login email address that they have to activate. Let's think about what to do if this user was leaving. Do give some consideration to what you want to do with records that are assigned to this user at the moment, whether you want to move them over to another user or leave them as they are. If you are going to assign them to one or more other users, I'd suggest that you use either the bulk actions functionality that you get on our landing page grids, or maybe use update through import. In addition to sorting out the records that are assigned to the user, remember to take the tick out of the box that says login enabled. You could just save that. That will mean that in this instance John can't log in anymore. But what you'll also want to do is go down to the allocated editions and make sure that this says no edition login denied, because that puts their license back into the pot to be used by someone else. And the same applies to these allocated extensions. You can untick them all with the checkbox at the top and click Save and Close. You'll see that you've got a little reminder there telling you that if there are any reports or processes that are running as this user, they won't work anymore because no one can log in as this user. And it's checking, do I want to reopen the window and maybe re-enable their login? But in this instance I don't. It's just a reminder for you. That's the session on user management, so we'll finish off by recapping on some of the key points. To make sure that a user can do what's required of them, ensure that the right modules are enabled on your account and that the user has the right combination of license, extensions and capabilities. For example, if a user needs to work with invoices, you might have given them the view, create and modify invoice capabilities, but if they've only got a CRM license rather than a business one, they won't be able to access invoices at all. When you're ready for the user to activate their license and start using Workbooks, make sure that the Login is enabled checkbox has been ticked on their user record, and also that they know their password. Conversely, if the user leaves, make sure you disable their login and remove their license and extensions. In terms of security, make sure that you've considered the complexity of your password policy and how frequently it expires. Also, whether or not you'll let users leverage the forgotten password functionality. Remember that you've got the option for users to have to click on a link in a confirmation email if they're logging in from a new device or from an IP address that they haven't used recently. If you prefer, you can use Google or Microsoft authentication rather than logging in using a password, and more information about this is available on our knowledge base. You should now feel more confident about creating new users and what to think about in terms of security. Thanks for watching this session, and if you'd like more help, please do visit workbooks.com/help/users_and_security. Thanks, bye bye.